This is the London Fintech Podcast, brought to you by your host, Mike Ballerman, bridging the worlds of suits and t-shirts, of finance and technology, bringing you insights, stories, and inspiration from the golden age of opportunity and innovation happening in London right now.
Hi, this is Mike Ballerman. This is London Fintech Podcast, episode 75, brought to you in association with Synchron, Archover and Smart Pension. And I'm delighted to welcome Nick Storonsky, co-founder and CEO of Revolut, to the Global Money App. Revolut have certainly knocked the ball out of the park in terms of fintech customer acquisition. In the less than 2 years since launch, they've gained over 500,000 customers who've done over 21 million transactions with a total value of $2.5 billion. In terms of the UK, off the top of my head, this makes them the most successful fintech at acquiring customers, or at a minimum in line with the Zopas of the world who took a decade longer. Their original claim to fame was delivering interbank exchange rates to their retail customers, as well as payments to other Revolut users and those without an account, via SMS, WhatsApp or email. Later, they added more personal financial offerings, which we shall dive into in the show. Unlike Monzo, however, who've gone down the banking route, Revolut decided to roll out these additional services without becoming a bank. To be or not to be a bank is a hot topic in the UK at the first half of 2016. Zopa becoming one, or to be more precise, setting one up, no doubt with new-style Chinese walls to avoid conflicts of interest. Funding Circle have not lost the faith and are not. So it's timely to dive into the heart of financial services, much deeper than the P2P lending borrowing baubles, to where we all hold our money and how we acquire basic services around that. Do we need a bank for that? Do we need a poorly named by the regulators e-money platform as per LFP031 with Rich Wagner, CEO of Advanced Payment Solutions on non-bank banking? Can we get away with neither of these, just plugging into banking as a service as per our previous show LFP074 on reinsurance as a service? All good questions, all very timely, and who better to speak to about not going the banking route in personal financial services than Nikolay? Plenty to talk about, so let's get on with the show. Hi Nikolay, thanks for joining me today.
Hi.
And this time I shall press the buttons right, so I have to send you a crate of champagne or something. For the listeners, you won't realise this, but some button had got pressed that I didn't realise. And we're sitting here having an excellent conversation without actually the recording taking place. So, just diving in again, I was asking Grace, your marketing and social media supremo, what to talk to you about, and she said I should ask you about watersports, but as this isn't an over 18 podcast, I thought I'd ask you about kite surfing and windsurfing instead.
Yes, that's true. So I'm a big fan of kite surfing. So I already do it for 6 or 7 years. Actually, initially I started doing windsurfing, and then one day I came to, I think it was Croatia. There was no wind enough for windsurfing, and I saw kite surfing guys were still be able to kite. So that's how I started kiting.
I was in Rye recently in Camber Sands, and it was incredibly windy. It was so windy that walking along the beach I almost turned around because it was so strong, and there were a couple of really good kite surfers obviously out in that, and they had to come on the beach for some reason. And the strength of the wind was just phenomenal. I mean, I don't actually know, just in terms of simple physics, how they stopped themselves being blown up. I mean, the guy was leaning almost horizontally with his heels in the sand. I had to get some kit or something like that. And obviously the angle of the kite, but he was a big, strong guy, and he was really struggling with it in this sort of like gale force winds.
I think kite surfing is not about being strong, but more about your technique, right? And generally the way it works, the stronger is the wind, the smaller the kite you take.
Right, so it's the same as in windsurfing where you adjust the sails, and I guess it's the same as in sailing as well. So originally you were a trader at CSFB and trading derivatives for many years, presumably having fun, and then presumably one day you woke up and thought, I'm now going to set up a startup, did you?
Yeah, definitely. So I was in trading for 8 years overall, and then simply kind of decided to go on my own to start something new. Banking became, well, not only banking but trading as well, it became very boring and generally not that rewarding as well. And I decided not to go on my own.
Yes, I've noticed that people who make things happen in the world tend to be people who don't have an infinite boredom threshold. I mean, some people somehow are either able to be bored and it doesn't cause them great torture, and they carry on for the whole life doing one thing, even though they lost interest decades ago. But other people, who you're clearly one, I'm also one as well, they can only tolerate so much boredom. And you think, there must be something else to do in life.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that you need to have something inside of you that tells you every day that you need to kind of get something done, achieve something, right? And that's probably one of the qualities that you need, to start a business.
And so in derivatives, you were very much a B2B person. at Credit Suisse, and now you're very much a B2C person. So what kind of thinking led you to, when you woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning, thinking, oh, I'll now go and start Revolut, a global money app which will give interbank rates? What kind of process led to that?
Well, first of all, it was my personal problem. So I traveled a lot. I also sent money abroad, right? And I was always kind of fed up with the rates that I'm being charged. So then I started searching the market for the product which would help to solve my personal problem. I didn't find anything. I ended up setting, multiple bank accounts in multiple countries. And the whole, construction was very clunky and not very user-friendly, right? So I decided, okay, why don't I do it for myself first, right?
Oh, right. It's personal pain.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is where Nigel Verdon was on the show with the Currency Cloud some time ago, who've clearly done very well at a B2B perspective in that. And he told the story about being somewhere in France and having a nightmare just trying to send money back to the UK and having to use a fax machine and all that kind of stuff. And in terms of the early days of fintech, clearly some firms approach fintech from a very marketing perspective, shall we say. And I'm thinking particularly of Transferwise and Crowdcube, and they're people without a background in FS. But other people like Nigel Verdon at Currency Cloud and you at Revolut are coming from an FS perspective. And the one thing that I've noticed over the years is that people with an FS background are tending to be more successful in fintech, which is in part a phenomenon that you would expect anyway, so that if you were trying to disrupt aviation, for example, the chance of you or I disrupting aviation is quite low because we don't know the industry at all. We don't know why it is the way it is and what things which can be changed. And partly, like aviation, I guess, it's because it's regulated and these things make it very different. And I think if you don't really have a background in FS or a background in a heavily regulated industry, you can get some initial momentum in terms of waving flags and hyping things, but it's very hard to go beyond that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, knowing industry definitely helps you, right? But then on top of it, you also need to be kind of a thinker, right? To be able to create solutions which are outside of the box, right? So you need to really kind of dig into problem, understand where the problem is coming from, what is the root cause, and then design a solution, right? Which would provide like a better product for people than existing ones. I mean, as simple as that. In Transferwise, I mean, they didn't really invent anything new. There were, tons of, brokers existed before who could do, transfers, much cheaper than Transferwise at the moment, right? So in that case, it was more like a marketing machine. But I mean, what we really do well, we really add value to people, right? So at the moment, you will not find any company in the market who will bring, more value than we. So because we simply give interbank rates, and we think that FX should be free.
Yes, we're at level 32 now, which is 3 floors above level 39, which is one of the places where a lot of fintech started, and it was one that was certainly associated with a lot of hype in that. And Transferwise almost came on the show. Well, actually, never almost came on the show. There were about 3 conversations I had with them, but the problem I always had with them, which is, as I say, in terms of a marketing machine, I couldn't see what they were doing that was new. And to the extent they had propaganda about what they were doing was new, it wasn't true. So the propaganda was that they were just doing peer-to-peer stuff, but actually 60% or 80% of it went through Currency Cloud as the back end. Yeah. And the propaganda was, banks are terrible, blah, blah, blah. Well, we know banks aren't perfect, otherwise there wouldn't be a fintech around today. But the reality is, without the interbank market, then Transferwise's deals wouldn't have got done. Yeah. Because, you go from the sort of front end through the sort of back end, like the Currency Cloud, into hitting HSBC's API in a big enough scale. And as you say, there were plenty of brokers around and that kind of thing. And so just in terms of advice to other people, so as you say, you can grow a business quickly if you're really adding value. So if you're giving them interbank rates, then you'll add value to them and you'll get lots of customers. But how do you avoid that costing you a complete fortune? Because if I give you wholesale rates on bananas, for example, yeah. I'm going to lose a lot of money giving you the wholesale price of bananas as opposed to the retail price of one banana.
I mean, the reality is our huge advantage is that we own the whole infrastructure. We build it all in-house, the whole backend, all the connections, right? And for us, it doesn't cost anything to exchange money at the moment because we are connected, to multiple banks, multiple brokers. Also, obviously, some of customer flows, they're being offset, right? So for us, I mean, the cost of exchanging money is negligible, right? And we chose to give interbank rates to customers as a benefit, right? And then effectively the whole business model, we cross-sell, other services. So by giving away free FX rates, we're able to drive, incredible customer acquisition growth with zero marketing spend, right? And then we effectively cross-sell, other products to our customers.
Right, and from a technical perspective, I'd understood that the problem of this sort of wholesale retail thing about exchange rates was in part that, of course, a bank is very happy to deal with people, but they're only happy to deal in a certain size. I don't know what the number is. For the sake of argument, let's say it's 10 million. If you've got 10 million US dollars, I'm looking out the window at HSBC. If you've got 10 million US dollars, maybe HSBC will give me the best rate for 10 million. But if I've got 10,000 US dollars, even if I'm doing it via an API, they're not going to give me that rate. In the same way that a wholesale seller will sell me 10 million bananas for a very different price of 10,000 bananas.
Yes, it's true, and the reality, why it happens is just because the bank is. I've been inside, right? So there are a lot of departments. IT department is separate from FX department. FX department is separate from your relationship banking department, right? And effectively, they all need to make money somehow, right? So what happens? IT department, builds the system, right? Then sales will sell it. They will take commissions. Traders will hedge it and take their commissions as well. So it's all kind of adds up. And a lot of things are not automated. That's another problem. So you need to run big teams, a lot of people to kind of support the whole infrastructure. So that's why it becomes quite expensive in the end. But yeah, you're right. With $10 million, you'll get a better rate, but it will still not be interbank rate.
Yes, and in terms of offering interbank rates, which was what you became known for first, and how you've got 500,000 people, I can offer people bananas at the wholesale rate, and I can sell them one banana at a time at a wholesale rate. But it'll be very expensive for me because the price of one banana is very different for the price of a banana if you buy 10 million bananas. And how did you organise that? How did you give people interbank rates without having to spend a fortune yourself buying bananas not at the wholesale? Let's call it wholesale. How did you get around the problem of you have to buy bananas at the retail rate yourself, but then you sell them at the wholesale rate, which is the opposite way around, of course.
So we effectively build a system, right, which is fully automated, which is connected to a few banks and a few liquidity providers, and which also manages a risk, right? So the way it works, we have, risk book with different cash balances, and then there is hedging, coming effectively a few times a day when we hit certain, risk limits. And it's all fully automated. We don't require army of people to run it. So that's our edge, right? That allows us to give to people interbank rates at no cost.
And so you didn't go down the route that Transferwise was alleged that they did, but they didn't actually do in great size of trying to do it on a peer-to-peer basis. Apart from when you can do it, if you've got two people doing it at the same time, it gets crossed.
One of the advantages being in financial services, right? I just know how it is done in any instrument, right? In a bank. So effectively, banks run, automated, market makers, right? It's a combination of, peer-to-peer matching, but in reality, the system is much more complex and advanced compared to peer-to-peer matching, and it produces, much better results. So we just implemented the same system on our side.
Yes, exactly, which comes to the advantage of having a background in it. So originally the idea was that fintech would do one thing really simply, so foreign exchange or peer-to-peer or something like that. And everybody swore that's all they would ever do. But of course, as time goes by, things change. And the example that all sticks in my mind at the moment is SoFi in the States, who started with student loans. They've just raised, in a typical American fashion, $500 million US, which is quite a lot of money. And roughly speaking, they seem to want to do everything for everybody. And actually, $500 million probably gives you a chance of doing that. On a more modest scale than raising $500 million, you guys have raised some money, and you started by doing one thing, as you say, but then you're adding things on the side. So the brand started like that, and we'll come back to the sort of software side of it, but then the brand has changed in terms that if you go to iPhone, iTunes, whatever the Apple thing is, or Google Play, you can tell which one I am, you can download it and try it for yourself. And you add more and more services. So how does that go from a brand perspective? Because one day people are saying, oh, Revolut, yes, they give great interbank rates, you've got to go there and do your FX. To another day, oh yeah, they do a current account and they do lending or whatever. What services do you offer at the moment if someone downloads you today and signs up with you?
So yeah, as you mentioned, we first started with just a plastic card, plus the ability to exchange money, right? So later we added services such as cross-border transfers. Now you can also borrow money with us. You will be able to buy insurance. You are now able to set yourself a current account as well within 3 minutes. So the reality is that all these features, they're not coming from us, but they're more based on requests from our customers, right? So all the time we're getting, customer requests, and then we effectively know that, majority of customers, they want to have, current accounts. Some people want the ability to borrow money on Revolut app, and then we simply build it and iterate and effectively fulfill the demand that we have.
which is the best kind, of course, which is that you know that something is going to sell. You don't sort of sit in your little cubicle thinking, oh, I've got a really good idea, and you work on it for 6 months and find out that it may be a good idea, but nobody wants to buy it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's demand-driven. Now, one of the problems with that on a brand perspective is in a sense what to call yourself. And one of the things that Tom Blomfield was saying at Monzo was one of his reasons for taking a banking license was it makes it much simpler speaking to journalists and customers and that, because when you say we're a bank, they think, oh yeah, we know what that is. And then he explains how he's a slightly different bank. We'll come to regulation in a minute. So you're not going down the banking route. As I say, there's this awful phrase, e-money issuer, or whatever it's called, where if you told me you said, oh, we're an e-money issuer, I'd have to scratch my head, and the average person in the city may not have heard of it. So I think I did use a phrase from your website, Global Money App, which I quite liked, but how do you describe yourselves? And if I say, what do you do? What do you do?
Well, we provide financial services that banks don't provide, as simple as that, right? And we provide it at better price with a better user interface.
So it's personal financial services?
Yeah, I mean, for example, if you look at Amazon, 20 years ago, they just started selling books, right, online. Yes. And then they later expanded into tons of more. So what is Amazon? It's like a shop, right?
Yes, and interestingly, shows how I'm wrong on everything. I thought, no, Amazon can't expand out of books because they do books. I mean, how can they do other things? And now I buy most of my Christmas shopping through them. So from that perspective then, you don't seem to find the brand development challenging from a sort of descriptive perspective, because actually your customers are asking you for these things. So from a different perspective, on the software side, one day you've built this nice, simple little app that does one thing, and then you add another thing on the side, and you add another thing on the side, another side. And then before you know it, your nice, simple, clean software has grown into a huge sort of bloatware with thousands of modules and 58 home pages and all that kind of stuff. And it's almost like building an inverted pyramid. You started with something small and you put something big on it. So how do you cope with it from a software perspective about re-engineering the development? At some point, presumably, you go, okay, look, we built all this based on that, but maybe we should just re-engineer the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, there is a whole science, how to get it done, and we kind of very rigid at following, certain principles. So first of all, everything that we build is based on modular principles, right? So every piece that we're building should be separate block, separate modular, separate code, right? And whenever we want to build, something bigger, we simply not building it from scratch. We're just taking, these small blocks, we're combining them together, and here is a feature, right, that allows us to iterate, much faster, build things, much faster without any bugs. Same applies in, app interface as well. So if you look at the whole app interface, it consists of very, very small, unique, blocks, right, of design guidelines. So we apply the same blocks for all the products that we have, credit, premium, insurance, wealth, money transfer, FX. It's all the same, underlying is the same, right? We're just, constructing, something different from, same blocks. So that's the key.
It's interesting because I was just thinking about a million years ago, about 35 years ago, when I had to do a dissertation at college. And my degree and my dissertation was a nightmare. I got completely dropped in the deep end, and I ended up working all of Easter, which was amazing in those days. And we're recording this the day after Easter now. And my dissertation was porting a Modular 2 compiler from the VAX to the IBM 370, which was a big mainframe at the time. And Modular 2 was the first modular language. It was a development out of Pascal. This is in the early 80s. And it's the kind of thing that people wouldn't do these days. So I had a printout which was 1 inch thick. There was not one comment in the whole code. There was not one description. And it was just a nightmare to sort of read through it. So I have direct experience myself of what this modular code stuff is like, which is in the old days amounted to, on my room at college, over Easter, I just couldn't understand this. So I just ripped up all the printout into the modules, and I put them on the floor, and I could see the 50 modules spread out over the floor. So I understand that. I mean, the technical challenge there, of course, is that it makes it easier, as you say, but you can end up having trouble on the interfaces. So if you've got interfaces, I don't know, for the sake of argument, defined on 15 parameters, or exporting or importing, or however it works these days, and you've got a whole idea of products. But then, as you say, you mentioned insurance. One day you introduce insurance, which has got different parameters and a different kind of perspective of the world.
I mean, you'll be surprised. I mean, you can still build insurance on existing blocks that we have, right, which we are doing at the moment. Have you seen, for example, WeChat in China?
Yes.
WeChat.
Yes, I haven't used it myself. I've heard of it.
Well, you know how many services you can have, Facebook, Twitter. You can also pay with WeChat. You can invest money with WeChat. You can buy yourself insurance with WeChat, right? And it's just huge. But the whole point why everyone is using it, because the interface is so simple, right? So they managed to create interface which effectively covers everything, right? So it is doable, it is possible.
So the software problems, surprisingly enough, have been sorted out over the last 35 years that we're still in the teething stage at the early stage. And I think there's more art than maybe what you're implying and more skill than maybe what you're applying in terms of keeping a nice, simple user interface.
Yeah.
Just take a simple example. If you go back to the earliest spreadsheets, or actually not the earliest word processors, the earliest word processors were awful, like VI, but go back to early versions of Excel, it's actually relatively straightforward. And then as time goes by and more features are added, it gets more and more complicated, and occasionally Microsoft has sort of rejigged the design, and my children sort of laugh at me and say, "Oh, you're using an old-fashioned version." Well, it's just simpler to use than their version. So there is quite a lot of art and quite a lot of skill in keeping it nice and usable, especially on quite a small real estate, which is a phone screen.
We, for example, have 6 designers, right? Working on this problem, how to make sure we package, all these features, all these products, and still in a very, very simple interface. And it's a difficult problem, right? But it's solvable.
Yes, and the proof of the pudding is in the eating, which is a cliche, and it's not relevant because the proof of the pudding is not in the eating anymore, it's in the rating. And I looked up on Google Play this morning your app, and it gets 4.5 out of 5, which for those that don't use Google Play is a very high rating, because there's already somebody complaining about something. I think Monzo are up to 4.1, last time I looked they're in the 3s. And Interbank, who raised an absolute fortune, are dismal, they're down at 2.3 actually. So the fact that you're 4.5 out of 5, while you're adding all these services, shows that you've done it very well. So that's the sort of brand growth, and that's the kind of software ideas. So what about the regulation? Because obviously you guys have got VCs on the board, and they expect you to sort of have some rational reasons for doing things and for not doing things. So you'd have sat down with the pros and cons things about, should we become a bank or should we become an e-money license? So what was it that made you guys go down the route of being an e-money platform, or what are these things are called?
To be honest, we always kind of have philosophy and approach of doing things that are easier, right? What can we do to achieve our goals in the most easiest way, right? And at that point of time, it was the most easiest way was to get e-money license, because it was quick. We got within 3 months.
When was this? 2014 or 2015?
2015. So we got e-money license, right? And we never kind of even thought about becoming a bank, because it was a more complicated route to achieving our goals, right?
And an e-money license, well, you have to tell me what it lets you do, but one of the things you can do is actually then open current accounts for your customers.
Yeah.
Unlike a bank, you don't hold the money yourself, but a bank holds the money. All the client funds in a big bucket, I don't know, Barclays or something like that.
Exactly, yeah.
So anybody having money through your app, the money doesn't actually sit in this office, as it were, metaphorically speaking, but actually it still sits at Barclays in an old-fashioned bank. But you do have the sort code and those kind of numbers on top of it. So the credit risk is with Barclays, not on Revolut.
Yeah, exactly. So effectively, a customer takes all the credit risk of Barclays. So what happens if Barclays go bust? Yeah.
And in terms of doing payments and things like that, talking of regulation, one of the regulators who I think is actually doing quite a good job is the payment systems regulator. Is there an economic regulator rather than a bureaucracy regulator? It may change in the future, of course. And they're opening up access to FPS, the faster payment system in the UK, which is the sort of the real, semi-real time or real time, the same day system. Are you looking at doing those kind of things as well, or can you do all that via the e-money license as it is?
Yeah, you can. We actually started already, connecting to a faster payment system directly.
Good. So on a different angle, I didn't quite understand from some of the articles I read about your international scale, and certainly one of the problems with the banking license, and I didn't know how it works with your e-money thing, is that even in the EU, even if the UK were staying in the EU, if you want to be a bank, it's quite hard because you can end up having to get licenses in different countries and all that kind of thing, and it can take quite a long time. So how has it worked from a sort of regulatory perspective, having a global money app? I mean, how can you have a global money app? Does it have to be sort of registered everywhere, or?
Basically, with e-money license, it's very easy. You effectively can issue accounts to almost anyone in the world, except certain countries, except US, probably India as well. And then when it comes to cards, right, when you want to issue cards to people, then it's a bit trickier. So you need to be licensed in each country outside of Europe, right? So for example, if we have cards license in Europe, so we can issue cards across the whole Europe, but as soon as we want to go to, say, Australia, we need to get local license there. So it's a bit trickier. It's still doable to go, country by country getting these licenses. But compared to getting a banking license in each of these countries, it's much easier because it will take you 3-4 months instead of 2 years.
And so how many licenses do you have at the moment, and what ambition about how many licenses?
Well, we're right now covering the whole Europe, so we're kind of owning the whole infrastructure. So MasterCard license, Visa license, e-money license. The only thing that we don't have is a banking license, which we don't need at the moment.
Yes. I mean, I have some sympathy if this e-money thing does work out and prove scalable in itself, because, as you will know from your background as well, the real point about a bank is that banks can do two things, one of which is create money, and the second is transform maturities, i.e. take someone's short-term deposits and turn it into a 25-year mortgage. And I haven't yet come across a fintech whose raison d'etre, whose reason for being, is to either create money or transform maturities. So it does seem a very big, blunt instrument just to provide the sort of financial services you're talking about. I want to transfer money to somebody in France or something like that. So before we wrap up the show, I'd like to thank all the listeners out there in many countries around the world. I'm sure a number of you would like to look at Revolut, and I'm sure many of you are already Revolut customers. We'll hear more in a minute from Nick about Revolut, where it's going, where it is. But I'd like to thank my brand partners of the podcast, Archover, smart, simple and transparent P2P business lending. Loans to £3 million for SMEs, delivering up to 7% secured and insured returns to lenders. Smart Pension, who are fast, secure and free. Check out their UK workplace pensions at autoenrolment.co.uk. Synchron, digital business consulting and technology services for top-tier FS. From startup to 7,000 people, 18 countries and $400 million of revenue. So we've touched on Revolut a little bit in terms of discussing some of these themes, but in terms of where you are today, of the thousands of listeners, many of whom won't be your clients, which ones should be checking you out, Nick? And in particular, what things do you think that you have which people will be interested in and they should go and look at? And then later we can talk about where you're going in the future and what you're hoping to offer.
Sure. I guess the main reason why people should try Revolut, simply because we will save you a lot of money. So for every 500 euros spent, we will save you probably like 30 to 40 euros. And that's the best deal in the market at the moment. And it's also very to use. So that's the main reason why you kind of need to try using Revolut.
And the other point is that, again, going back to the fact that everything was unbundled at the beginning. I mean, Transferwise spent a lot of money on publicity and getting people out there. But with Transferwise, you do one thing. Whereas with the Revolut, you've got these other services surrounding it as well.
Well, I mean, it's easier, right? As soon as you just get one up, if it provides you the ability to transfer money as well abroad, easier than Transferwise, then why not to do it?
And when I hear these kind of things, I always think they're quite nice as an individual, but like yourself from a business perspective, I have frustrations. The banking services I get for my company are far more painful than the ones I get myself. I mean, my current account is free, it has been free, but my business bank account is £5.50 every month, and whenever somebody sends me money, it costs something else, or sending a cheque, it all costs things.
That's another thing that we actually didn't discuss. We're issuing our Revolut for Business.
Well, this is the thing I was going to go to lead on, actually. So I think I should be after your Revolut for Business, or at least checking it out. So what will Revolut for Business do for businesses, or people like me, who, because of the way the world works these days, have to be both a person and also a business to interface with the world? And when is that going to be rolled out?
So we're rolling it mid-May. And the whole value proposition, you will be able to open a unique multi-currency bank account with us under 3 minutes. And then instantly you can issue yourself corporate cards to yourself or to your employees. And you can also do cross-border transfers, and you will always get interbank FX rates.
Excellent. Well, I think I should definitely check you out, actually, because it's one of the annoying irritations. I mean, in the scheme of things, whatever it is, £5 a month for a banking fee isn't infinite. But the annoyance I have with my current bank, which will probably remain nameless, is very high. So this kind of irritation factor with banking services is one thing which is certainly helping fintech. I mean, there are lots of logical reasons that you hear about why the incumbents have got advantages, and they do. I mean, one of which is that they're huge and they've got vast sums of money. They can get it wrong for 20 years and still buy Revolut and Zopa and all that kind of stuff if they got it wrong in 20 years' time. And this cost of capital and all these kind of things. But one of the factors which you can't quantify and therefore often doesn't make these reports or management consultants' analyses is irritation. If you're really annoyed with somebody, I'm annoyed with Three, my mobile phone customer at the moment. One of my daughters has got a Three phone, and I've been on the sort of call to the help centre in India for like an hour at the time trying to sort basic stuff out, and you get told, oh, you can't do that, sir, and you can't do this, sir, and oh, blah, blah, blah. And that irritation factor means at that point, I just don't care. I'm just going to jump into anybody else's arms kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think that I should probably come back, because the opportunity I think that exists in fintech to provide banking services for small businesses is really very high. And apart from the likes of Funding Circle doing sort of loans to small businesses, I have come across very few at all that are actually doing banking services of businesses. And I don't think I've come across anybody in the UK who's not only going to be offering it, but has your background in terms of doing whatever the number was, I said before, 21 million transactions to a value of £2.5 billion.
We're now registering 50 to 70 companies every day for Revolut for Business, and we now have like more than 8,000 companies who registered already for Revolut for Business. Some of them are very big, like Virgin Atlantic, Emirates.
Yes, they're a bit bigger than me, they are.
That's okay. I mean, it's like self-served interface, so you do everything yourself through a kind of web interface.
That sounds excellent, actually, and on that basis I expect you to be even tenfold greater. And going back to where I started, as I say, having heard from Balderton about you guys last summer, I can see why they and their very serious blue-chip VCs in London, I can see why they are very keen on you guys, because in the short term, hype and flag waving and lots of press coverage can work really well, as Transferwise found. But over the long term, as Interbank is seeing, despite all its money, the one thing that does succeed is ratings like 4.5 out of 5 on Google Play Store.
Yeah, exactly.
You can get a nice article about you in The Guardian or The Telegraph saying, oh, it's a wonderful company, blah, 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 and have that difference. But in the modern world, and it's not just this cliche of millennials, I mean, even my father looks at a phone now and uses apps and that kind of stuff. Anybody can look at the ratings. And as you mentioned Amazon before, you look at a rating for a book and it gets 1 out of 5 out of 100 reviews, or a pod recording device or something, you're never going to buy it, and vice versa. So you guys are succeeding in the court of public opinion, which is the democratising way. So I wish you every success in the future, Nick, and I shall be definitely checking out your business offering in May. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you have consulting, advisory/non-exec, or media needs in the FS or Fintech space, get in touch with me at mike@londonfintechpodcast.com.
We could sit in a bender all day, watching the firelight dance, watching the firelight dance. We could walk in the mountains before dawn, watching a happy moonrise, watching a happy moonrise. Come away from the city, with the tarmac so dead and the people so sad. Come away from the city, with the faces so grey, with the pain of the everyday. We are wild like the mountains and the trees. Can you see what I mean? Can you see what I mean? We fit in between the earth and the sky. Kiss the city goodbye, wave the city goodbye, wave the city goodbye. The city goodbye. Watch the firelight dance with me. 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 Watch the firelight